She ate like someone who had known hunger personally. Not the casual hunger of skipping lunch. Not the mild inconvenience of a late dinner. But the deep, bone-level hunger of not knowing whether tomorrow would bring food at all. It was past midnight inside one of New York's most expensive mansions. The kitchen gleamed, marble countertops, a 6-burner stove, a refrigerator the size of a small bedroom. Enough food to feed a neighborhood. And in the corner of that magnificent kitchen, half hidden in shadow, a young woman sat on a wooden stool, quietly eating leftovers from a plate the family had barely touched. Her name was Amara Johnson, and she had no idea she was being watched. Hidden in the dark hallway just beyond the kitchen door stood 2 small figures, Ethan, 12 years old, sharp-eyed and confused, and his little sister Lily, 8, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. They had come downstairs for a snack. What they found instead would stay with them for the rest of their lives. "Why is she eating like that?" Ethan whispered. Neither of them had an answer. But behind them, tall and silent as a statue, stood their father, Richard Halston. Billionaire. Tech mogul. A man who had not felt genuinely moved by anything in 3 long years. He was watching too. And something about the way Amara ate, carefully, gratefully, as if every bite was a small miracle, cracked something open in his chest that he didn't know was still capable of breaking. "Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a number in the comments right now, 1 if you think Richard fires her. 2 if you think this changes everything. Go ahead, pause, type your number, then come right back. Because what happens next morning, nobody in that house saw coming. Not even Richard himself. To understand why that midnight moment mattered so much, you have to understand who Amara Johnson really was, because on paper, she looked like just another employee. She was 28 years old, born and raised in the Bronx, the eldest of 3 siblings. Her mother, Gloria, had worked double shifts at a laundromat for most of Amara's childhood, and her father had left before Amara was old enough to miss him. What she grew up with instead were lessons, hard ones. How to stretch a pound of rice across 4 days. How to smile through embarrassment at the school lunch line. How to sleep with a quiet stomach and tell yourself it builds character. She had been a brilliant student. Earned a partial scholarship to a state university and studied social work because she wanted to spend her life helping people navigate the exact kind of hardship she had survived. But in her sophomore year, her mother collapsed at work, a stroke, sudden and severe. Amara dropped out without hesitation. Moved back home. Became the caregiver, the provider, the glue. The years that followed were a quiet kind of war. Odd jobs. Cleaning offices. Waitressing on weekends. She sent her younger brother to finish high school and her sister to community college, while her own dreams sat folded in the back of a drawer like a letter she couldn't bear to reread. By the time Amara walked through the iron gates of the Halston mansion, she carried all of that invisibly on her shoulders. She was hired through a domestic staffing agency. Her references were immaculate. She was described as discreet, efficient, and exceptionally conscientious. What the agency did not mention, what Amara would never volunteer, was that she had spent 2 winters without stable housing, that there were months when a full meal was a luxury, and that the habit of eating quietly, in corners, in leftovers, was not laziness or theft. It was survival memory. The body doesn't forget what the mind tries to move past. Now she lived in a small room off the back of the mansion, worked 6 days a week, and sent most of her paycheck home. She cooked meals she never tasted fully. She cleaned rooms she would never sleep in. And every night, after the family retired, she would carefully gather what remained on their plates, never wasteful, never greedy, and eat alone in the kitchen. To her, it was nothing. To the family watching from the hallway, it was everything. Richard Halston had not always been cold. Those who knew him before the IPO, before the magazine covers, before the grief, described a different man entirely. Warm, even. A father who coached his son's Little League team on Saturdays and let his daughter paint his nails on Sunday evenings. A husband who still left notes in his wife's coat pockets years into their marriage. Her name had been Claire. And when she died, a car accident, 3 years prior, a rainy Tuesday that Richard still could not drive through without his hands going tight on the wheel, something in him went quiet. Not dramatically. Not with visible collapse. Just quiet. Like a house whose power had been cut. The lights still came on. The room still functioned. But the warmth was gone. He threw himself into work. Built his company from a successful startup into a global empire. Won awards. Gave speeches. Smiled for cameras with practiced precision. And at home, he moved through his children's lives like a polite stranger, present, financially generous, and emotionally elsewhere. Ethan had responded to his father's absence by becoming watchful. Serious beyond his years. He studied people the way his father studied markets, quietly, carefully, filing observations away. Lily had responded differently. She talked to everyone. The houseplants. The gardener. And now, especially, Amara. It started the second week. Lily had wandered into the kitchen while Amara was preparing dinner and simply climbed onto a stool and started narrating her day. Amara had smiled genuinely and kept chopping vegetables. She didn't shoo her away. Didn't redirect her to her room. Just listened, occasionally asking a question, occasionally laughing. Lily started appearing every evening after that. Ethan watched this from doorways, pretending not to be curious. And Richard noticed, because Richard noticed everything, but said nothing. He told himself it was fine. The help was good at her job. His children seemed lighter. The house felt, marginally, less like a museum. He told himself this was normal. He told himself he was not watching her more than was professionally appropriate. He told himself a great many things that, in time, would prove entirely untrue. The first sign of trouble came from a woman named Diana Prescott. Diana was Richard's personal assistant, polished, possessive, and deeply invested in the architecture of Richard's life, which she had helped build and fully intended to continue managing. She had been with him for 4 years. She knew his schedule, his preferences, his silences. And she had, for the last 18 months, harbored something beyond professional loyalty. She noticed the shift before Richard did. She noticed that Lily now asked whether Amara was coming today before asking about her own father's schedule. She noticed that Ethan, who had barely spoken at dinner for 2 years, was now occasionally telling stories that usually began with "Amara said something funny today." She noticed that Richard, who had previously scrolled through his phone throughout the family's brief shared dinners, had twice set it face down on the table. And she made a decision. She began with small things. She filed a complaint with the staffing agency, citing a minor inventory discrepancy in the household pantry. She mentioned casually to Richard that the children were getting perhaps a bit too attached to the household staff. She had a colleague, a woman who ran a rival staffing firm, call with a reference issue that didn't exist. Amara, who had no idea any of this was happening, continued her work with the same quiet diligence. But the ground was shifting beneath her. Then came the evening Richard's sister, Caroline, arrived for an unannounced weekend visit. Caroline Halston was beautiful, opinionated, and operated entirely on the belief that she knew what was best for her brother. She had never liked Claire, had found her too ordinary for Richard's world, and she liked the idea of a maid influencing her niece and nephew even less. At dinner, Lily asked if Amara could eat with them. The table went silent. Richard looked up from his plate. Caroline's eyebrow arched with surgical precision. "That's not how these things work, sweetheart," Caroline said, her voice honey-laced and immovable. "Why not?" Lily asked. No one answered. That night, Amara overheard, not intentionally, but the hallway carried sound, Caroline speaking to Richard in the study. "She's the help, Richard. You let this go on and the children will be confused about boundaries. About class. About? That's enough, Caroline." A pause. "I'm just saying what needs to be said. You're lonely. I understand that. But don't mistake proximity for connection." Amara didn't hear Richard's response. She moved away from the hall quietly, returned to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed. She had heard versions of this her entire life. The reminder that she was useful, not belonging. Present, not included. She almost handed in her notice that night. She wrote it out. folded the paper, set it on her nightstand. But then she heard something through the wall, faint, small Lily, in the next room, singing to herself before bed. A song Amara had hummed once, weeks ago, while mopping the kitchen floor. She unfolded the letter and didn't hand it in. I need to pause here, because this is the moment everything could have ended. Amara almost walked away. And honestly, nobody would have blamed her. But she stayed. Now here's my question for you. Have you ever stayed somewhere, a job, a relationship, a situation, not because it was easy, but because something small told you it wasn't over yet? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to read your stories. 3 weeks later, something went missing. A bracelet, platinum, diamond set, a gift from a client, disappeared from Caroline's guest room. Caroline, who had extended her stay and inserted herself firmly into the household's rhythms, reported it with the kind of calm that is more dangerous than anger. She didn't accuse. She simply mentioned it to Richard. And then mentioned, in passing, that she had noticed Amara near her room the previous afternoon. Richard called a meeting with the staffing agency. Amara was questioned, professionally, formally, with a representative present, and she answered every question with steady honesty. She had cleaned the guest room. She had not touched the jewelry. She did not know where the bracelet was. The agency concluded the matter was inconclusive. But Caroline had already made the decision for everyone. I think it would be best if you let her go, she told Richard that evening. For the household's peace of mind. For the children's stability. She hasn't been found guilty of anything. No. But perception matters, Richard. Especially in this neighborhood. He didn't fire her that night. But the next morning, Amara arrived in the kitchen to find Diana waiting, not Richard, with an envelope and an expression that said everything before she spoke a word. Mr. Halston has decided to make a change. He appreciates your service. You're being given 4 weeks' pay as severance. We'll need you to collect your things by noon. Amara stood completely still for 10 seconds. Then she said, "All right." She did not cry. She did not argue. She thanked Diana with a nod and walked back to her room, and it was only when the door was closed that she sat down on the floor, back against the bed, and let the quiet devastation of it settle over her. She had survived worse. She knew that. But this particular wound had a shape she recognized, the specific pain of being dismissed by people who never truly saw you to begin with. She began to pack. Lily appeared in her doorway 20 minutes later, eyes wide and glassy. "Are you leaving?" Amara looked at her, this small, solemn child who sang borrowed songs, and said, gently, "It's time for me to go, baby girl." Lily walked into the room, climbed onto the bed, and hugged Amara from behind with both arms locked tight around her neck. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Ethan appeared in the doorway a moment later. He looked at the suitcase, then at his sister, then at Amara. He turned and walked away without a word. What happened in the next 4 hours would not be known to Amara until much later. Ethan went directly to his father's office. He knocked, didn't wait for an answer, and walked in. Richard looked up from his screen, visibly startled. Ethan almost never initiated contact. "Did you fire Amara?" Richard set down his glasses. "That's not something." "Did you?" A pause. There were concerns raised about. She didn't take anything. "I know she didn't. Ethan, these are adult matters. I know where the bracelet is." Ethan's voice was flat and certain. "Lily borrowed it to play dress-up last week. It's in the bottom of the toy chest in her room. I saw her put it back and I didn't say anything because I didn't think it mattered, but now it matters." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Richard had heard in years. He stood up slowly. They went to Lily's room together. Opened the toy chest. And there, beneath a plastic tiara and a pair of fairy wings, lay the platinum bracelet. Richard held it in his palm for a long time. Then, "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Ethan looked at his father with the kind of directness that takes most adults a lifetime to develop. "Because you weren't looking. You never look, Dad. You look at your phone. You look at your computer. You looked at us for the first time in months because of her. And now you're sending her away because Aunt Caroline told you to. And you didn't even ask." He left the room. Richard stood in the hallway, bracelet in hand, son's words ringing like a verdict he couldn't appeal. He had been a fair man once. Careful. Someone who believed in evidence before judgment. When had he stopped being that person? He knew exactly when. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Amara was in the foyer, suitcase at her feet, waiting for her cab. Diana hovered nearby, professionally neutral. Caroline was nowhere in evidence, wisely. Richard stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Amara looked up. He held out the bracelet. It was in Lily's toy chest. Amara looked at it. Said nothing. I owe you an apology. You owe me a job. Her voice was quiet. Not angry. Just precise. The corner of Richard's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. I'd like to offer you that too. If you're willing. She studied him for a moment, long enough to make him uncomfortable, which was, perhaps, exactly the right duration, and then she said, I'll stay. But I eat at the table from now on. Behind Richard, from the top of the stairs, came Lily's voice, clear as a bell. She said yes. She said yes. Okay, Lily absolutely carried that scene, and we all know it. But I need your honest reaction right now. Was Richard too slow? Or did he redeem himself just in time? Comment below, and while you're there, if this story is hitting different for you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need stories like this. Now, the climax. And it is worth it. 3 months passed. The house changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way seasons change, subtly, then undeniably. Amara ate at the table. Not every night, but often enough that it stopped being notable and started being normal. She and Ethan discovered a shared obsession with documentary films. She taught Lily how to make her grandmother Gloria's cornbread, and Lily taught Amara every word of a pop song Amara had never heard and could now never get out of her head. Richard began leaving the phone face down more often. Diana resigned. Quietly, with a formal letter and no ceremony. She had seen which direction the wind was turning, and her interests lay elsewhere. Caroline returned for Christmas. The dinner table scene that followed would be recalled differently by everyone present, but the outline was clear. Caroline arrived with her signature mixture of warmth and barbed observation. She was gracious to Amara in the way that made graciousness feel like a warning. She complimented the cornbread. Asked Amara where she was from originally. Mentioned, obliquely, that she supposed modern households operated differently now. Amara answered every question with complete composure. And then Caroline, perhaps emboldened by wine and old habit, made the mistake. She turned to Richard and said, lightly, she's lovely, of course. But I do hope the children understand the nature of the relationship. It can be confusing for them, attachment to staff. The table went quiet. It was Ethan who spoke first. She's not staff. She's family. 12 years old. Clear as a gavel. Caroline blinked. Ethan, darling, I only mean. She stayed, Lily said simply, matter-of-factly, chin resting on her hand. When everything was hard, she stayed. That's what family does. Richard set down his fork. He looked at Caroline, really looked at her, the way he had been learning to look at things again, and said, very calmly, I think the children have said it better than I could. And I agree with them. Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, looked around the table, at 2 children with steady eyes, at a young woman who met her gaze without flinching and made, perhaps for the first time, the wise choice. She said nothing more about it. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children were in bed, Richard found Amara in the kitchen, her kitchen now, in every way that mattered, making tea. He stood in the doorway. You could have defended yourself more tonight. You had plenty to say. She looked at him over her shoulder. I know. But they said it better. He nodded slowly. Amara, can I ask you something? You can ask. The first night. When we saw you eating. You weren't embarrassed. Not really. Why? She was quiet for a moment, hands wrapped around her mug. Because I've spent my whole life shrinking for other people's comfort. Being embarrassed about needing things. Apologizing for surviving. She paused. I was done with that before I ever walked into your house. I just ate. Because I was hungry. And I wasn't going to be ashamed of that anymore. Richard stood there with the full weight of that answer settling somewhere deep. Good, he finally said. You shouldn't be. Spring came to the Halston mansion, and it felt genuinely, measurably different than the springs before it. Richard made changes. Quietly, without announcement, the way real change tends to happen. He hired 2 additional staff members, ensured all of them were treated with explicit dignity, and revised the household agreements to reflect that. He enrolled in grief counseling. Not because anyone asked him to, but because a 12-year-old had told him he wasn't looking, and he had decided to start. Amara stayed. But her role evolved, the way things evolve when people stop pretending they don't matter to each other. She became something the staffing agency didn't have a title for, a constant, a presence. Someone whose voice was heard in conversations about the children, about the household, about the direction of the days. She also, with Richard's encouragement and a schedule rearranged to allow it, re-enrolled in school. Part-time, online, in the evenings. Finishing what she had put down years ago for her family's sake. She called her mother every Sunday. Gloria cried the first time Amara told her. The bracelet incident was never discussed again. Caroline sent flowers at Easter with a card that said, simply, I misjudged. I'm sorry. Amara put the flowers on the kitchen table where everyone could see them. Lily asked if she could call Amara by a special name, not her first name, not a title, but something theirs. Amara told her she could think about it and let her know. Lily thought about it for 3 days. Then she came into the kitchen one morning, climbed onto her usual stool, and said, I want to call you Amara mine. Like you're ours and we're yours. Amara looked at the small, certain child who had refused to stop singing even in a cold house. Amara mine, she repeated. Yeah. She set down her dish towel. Okay. Here's what I want you to hold on to from this story. Amara never asked to be saved. She wasn't waiting for a billionaire to notice her. She wasn't performing her pain for an audience. She simply survived with dignity, with restraint, with the quiet kind of strength that doesn't announce itself but never, ever quits. And Richard? He wasn't a bad man. He was a distracted one. A grieving one. A man who had let someone else's voice, Caroline's, Diana's, the world's, drown out the voice of his own conscience. It took a midnight kitchen and a 12-year-old's honesty to remind him who he actually was. The lesson isn't that struggle leads to reward. Life doesn't promise that. The lesson is this: the smallest moments carry the biggest truths. A woman eating leftovers in a dark kitchen. A child who notices. A father who finally looks up. You will be underestimated. You will be dismissed. People will see your need and mistake it for weakness, your resilience and mistake it for convenience. Let them be wrong. Keep eating. Keep surviving. Keep showing up with your whole, unashamed self. Because sometimes the person watching from the hallway, the one you never knew was there, is about to change everything. And sometimes you're that person for someone else. If this story moved you, if something in it felt true, felt familiar, felt like something you needed to hear today, please leave a comment right now. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it Ethan standing up to his father? Lily's she stayed? Or Amara simply refusing to be ashamed of hunger? Every comment, every like, every share puts this story in front of someone who might need it. Subscribe if you're new here, because we tell stories that mean something. And until the next one, stay unashamed. Stay standing. We'll see you soon.